Throughout the course of motoring history, many great cars have come and gone, the main appeal of these machines not only being in their styling, but also their engine, from which the latter facets of performance and speed derive in order to push what would otherwise be pretty faces into the realm of legend. In one instance, though, a car was developed which, externally, had looks to match the crisp beauty of the Aston Martin DB5 and the Jaguar E-Type, but beneath the skin was compromised by what has often been considered the worst engine ever placed into an automobile, the Triumph V8, a hastily built power plant used to power the company's new flagship, the Stag of 1970. But its pervasive problems would eventually drag down both car and engine, and in so doing come to encapsulate all that was wrong with British motoring during this dark era. The origins of the Triumph V8 start with the car for which it was developed, the Triumph Stag, a model created in order to help the Triumph brand appeal to a new audience of customers, as grand tourers like the Jaguar E-Type and the Aston Martin DB5 took the world by storm during the early 1960s, the main products of the Triumph marque by this point being low-cost but nippy sports cars that rivaled the creations of MG and Austin Healey. In 1963, famed Italian car designer Giovanni Michelotti, who had a long-standing association with Triumph, undertook a styling exercise to create a convertible version of the company's 2000 saloon, and with smotherings of positive feedback being poured onto the concept, Triumph chose to push this into a full production model called the Stag, a 4-seat open-top GT car which featured, aside from its magnificent looks, a variety of functional additions, including a somewhat unique T-bar roof arrangement implemented in response to proposals by the American government to ban convertibles after the death of James Dean, the Stag providing both the safety of a hardtop and the open-air enjoyment of a drop-top in a single package. Aiming to provide performance that would take on the likes of the Porsche 911, the company's slew of traditional inline-4 power plants were nowhere near up to the challenge, while the Triumph 2.5-litre inline-6 engine from the Triumph 2000, though initially considered, was found not to provide the power or refinement that GT buyers expected in the segment, and by 1967, discussions had begun as to incorporating the newly introduced Rover 3.5-litre V8 from the Rover P5B and Rover P6, this powerplant having been derived from a small block Buick engine. Triumph, however, was steadfast that, in spite of fitting a Rover V8 requiring minor amendments to the engine bay, their own engineers could come up with something better, their solution being to twin their existing inline-4 into a 2.5-litre V8, the inline-4 having been designed originally for the potential to be twinned in a manner similar to Pontiac engines in the United States, beginning a protracted development program that initially proposed the use of Bosch mechanical fuel injection, only for reliability issues to force the abandoning of this idea, as Triumph felt that they wouldn't be able to make the injected engine meet US emission requirements, resulting in the adoption of a simple, but less efficient, twin-carburetted configuration. While the carburetted engine ran smoothly and cleanly enough to be sold in the US, they provided less power than the injected version, Triumph choosing to remedy this by increasing the displacement of the engine from 2.5 to 3 litres, but rather than increasing the displacement by stroking the engine via a crankshaft with a longer throw, their engineers opted instead to widen the cylinder bores in order to gain the desired half-litre of extra displacement, but in so doing gave the engine a massively over-square profile which ruined the torque. More importantly, the larger bores ate into the space where the coolant passages were located, forcing them to be downsized in order to accommodate the larger cylinders, but in so doing stunting the car's internal cooling capacity, exacerbated further by the woeful water pump assembly, in which rather than having a water pump that's driven from the accessory belt at the front of the motor, it instead was mounted on the top of the engine in the valley of the V, and driven internally through a geared jackshaft, the gears of which were known to shear without warning, and thus caused the pump to stop spinning, made worse still by the fact that, when parked on level ground, the water pump was higher than the radiator fill cap, meaning that unless tilted on an angle, the coolant system could not be filled with enough fluid to actually reach the water pump. Beyond the water pump, the Triumph V8 utilized an aluminium head and iron block, and while this wasn't an uncommon configuration for a power plant, it did require the use of special corrosion-inhibiting coolant to prevent internal electrolytic corrosion of the system, a problem not widely known even at dealership level, and thus very few used the correct coolant in this period, while cooling concerns were worsened as, in order to cut costs, Triumph located the coolant temperature sender in one of the cylinder heads, which, while not an issue for the inline-4 engines it was designed to work with, meant that the opposing cylinder head could overheat to the point of failure, and the gauge wouldn't be able to register this. Finally, and most questionable of all, was the decision to use head studs at two different angles on the same head, the head stud being a sturdy bolt that clamps the head to the block, and, in most engines, run exactly perpendicular to the deck of the block, and while Triumph mounted half the head studs this way, The other half were about 20 degrees out of alignment, the engineer's rationale being that skewing the studs this way would allow technicians to replace the head gaskets without removing the camshafts and setting all the valves, which, while avoiding a lengthy process, inadvertently caused major warping issues for the cylinder heads, as the straight studs heated up differently than the longer splayed studs, thereby causing the engine to get hot and promote warpage, matters again made worse due to the long steel studs frequently fusing solid to the aluminium head, a problem that couldn't easily be rectified due to the dissimilar angles. Other failures in the Triumph V8 were main bearings that were too small and failed regularly, and an extremely long single-row timing chain that stretched and needed to be replaced every 40,000 kilometers, the interference engine configuration of the V8 meaning that, in the event the timing chain broke, it would destroy the valves and pistons as well. Upon the launch of the Triumph Stag and its accompanying V8 in late 1970, the machine was lauded for its superb styling and clever T-bar roof arrangement, but sadly very few were able to enjoy the car's performance and speed, as the many problems with the V8 quickly reared their ugly head, compounded further by the poor build quality of the products being outshopped by the then newly formed British Leyland, which had incorporated Triumph during its 1968 merger. Strike action, together with lackluster quality control, only serving to emphasize the powerplant's many faults. With the car having gone on sale with an incredibly unreliable engine, together with the presence of the Rover V8 also within the same market segment for the Rover P6 and the Range Rover, the Stag was a commercial disaster for the Triumph marque, being withdrawn from sales in the United States in 1973 after selling only 2,871 units, and struggling on overall until 1977, whereupon it was replaced by the Triumph TR7 with only 25,877 examples produced. Initially, plans were to create a V8 variant of the Triumph TR7 called the Triumph Lynx, with considerations being to fit the car, which included a 12-inch longer wheelbase over the regular TR7, with the Triumph V8 from the Stag, but in light of the powerplant's many endemic flaws, a Rover V8 was opted for instead, and placed into the sole Lynx prototype. The project, despite much promise, sadly meeting its demise in the wake of British Leyland's 1975 bankruptcy, wherein, as part of widespread cost-cutting measures, BL's new chief executive, Sir Michael Edwards, axed the Lynx program in 1978. Today, the Triumph V8 is still considered among the worst engines ever placed into a production car, but regardless of its disastrous reputation, approximately 91% of surviving roadworthy Stags are still fitted with this powerplant, which can be considered more a testament to the determination of the owners and amateur mechanics that keep these cars running, the overarching sentiment of the entire Stag project being very much that it was a good car ruined.